Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Hillary Nathan Geddish, the Director of Development at Joslyn Art Museum, and just would like to thank everyone for giving up their time to join us virtually, though we hope soon in person. And thank you for your support of the museum. We truly, truly appreciate in all ways. Tonight, I'm excited to allow you some time and introduce you to Karin Campbell, our Phil Wilson Curator of Contemporary Art. Before she gets started, I just wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. The first being, if you're having any technical difficulties, please just use the chat box and I'll try to help you out. And if you have questions for our panelists tonight, go ahead and use the Q&A feature, which is at the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer those later in the program. Other than that, thanks again. And Karin, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Hillary, for the introduction. And thank you all for joining this evening. I'm going to stop sharing this screen for just a moment here. Oh, and it didn't stop playing. Oh, here we go. Okay, there we are. Welcome, everyone. As Hillary said, my name is Karin Campbell. I am the Phil Wilson Curator of Contemporary Art at Joslyn. And I want to thank you for being here tonight, especially for those of you who are joining us from outside of the Omaha metropolitan area. Thank you for taking the time this evening. So a bit of news before we get started. Allison contacted me and let me know about an urgent personal matter she needed to attend to today. So unfortunately, she is not with us live this evening. However, she was gracious enough to rearrange her schedule a bit, and we were able to pre-record a conversation, which I will be sharing with you this evening. So before we get started with that, just a bit about Allison. She will be the final artist featured in the Riley Contemporary Artist Project Gallery before Joslyn closes in May for 2 years to the public for our building expansion and renovation. And in this exhibition, you will see Allison bringing together place-based folklore and personal family anecdotes to create these mythologies or these epic narratives that address how both the social and the physical landscapes of the American South have changed and are continuing to change today. Allison works across media, so you'll see photographs, sculptures, and video in her Riley Cap Gallery exhibition. The video you were watching as you came in is the featured work. And Allison has this broad range of material interests. So many of her materials are from nature, things like feathers, palm fronds, horsehair, you see tree branches, but then sometimes she'll drop in these manufactured objects as kind of intentional disruptors in the system of her work. And all of these elements come together rather seamlessly for this wide-ranging exploration of some very timely topics, specifically the disproportionate impact of things like climate change, land use, and displacement on communities of color, both historically and in the current moment. So without further ado, I am going to go ahead and share the recording. Can get it here. Okay. This runs about 31 minutes, so I will see you on the other side of it. And I'm going to cut it off just before it's over because I noticed there was some sort of technical glitchiness when the recording was sent to me, and I've lost a little bit of audio at the very end, but I can simply tell you what I said at the end of that conversation. So please enjoy. So I'm going to start with just a really quick biographical introduction, and then we will dive into some conversation about Allison's work in general, and then her exhibition in the Riley Cap Gallery. So Allison was born in 1984 in Kentucky and raised in North Florida in a region known as the Big Bend, which is this sort of marshy swath of land that connects the Panhandle to the peninsula and then goes north to the Georgia border. During her youth, she and her family traveled quite regularly from Florida to Western Tennessee, where her mother's family's homestead was located. And I'm sharing these sort of broad biographical details of Allison's upbringing because it's really during this time, Allison, that you start to understand, right, the great power and histories that land in the American South holds. And this bears significant influence on your work today. So I want to take a step back from that for just a moment because we are going to unpack that a little more. And I want to start with the work that has become something of a signature for you, and that is your fencing masks. So you were inspired to start working with fencing masks after you found this photograph of two Black American soldiers fencing as a pastime. Can you tell us a bit more about that image and why it was so striking to you?
Yeah, I found this beautiful image. I was in grad school working on my MFA, and it just was so striking to me. And I began to think about soldiers who would go off to fight for the country and come back to the same conditions, social inequities that they might have had experienced before they left. So I just began collecting masks, and I would see them at thrift stores or and then I began searching out for them, eBay, what have you. And I had a studio full of these masks, and I really hadn't had an agenda for them or anything yet. Had no idea what I was going to do with them. And I started putting them in the photographs first, and then maybe on occasion bring them out into the gallery space, sort of as an accompaniment to the photograph. And then after that, began to embellish them, use them in these other ways. And now they've become this kind of sculptural component of my work in their own right. And from there, now I kind of think of them almost as these witnesses or watchers over the landscape, similar to some of the creature figures that I also make, which I know we'll discuss a little bit later. But yeah, so there are these kind of human-like, apparition-like sculptural forms that appear in some of my installations or on their own as objects on the wall.
Mm-hmm. And I want to go through a few images here to give people a kind of a good feel for your material sensibility with the masks. Let's talk about materials. You source many of them from kind of you repurpose many of them. Many of them were found materials. Can you say a little bit about, first of all, where you're sourcing these materials, but how do materials speak to you? How do you know that, something like solo wood, which we see here, or these really incredible feathers that kind of morph from black to green, why do these find life in your work?
Mm-hmm. Materials are so important to all the sculptural elements in the work. I mean, for me, I like to think of the actual physical materials of landscape as a central protagonist, as a central feature of the work. So I'm really thinking about how the actual materials of the landscape can tell us information about our history, our present, and future as well. And so sourcing, I source a lot of things, just literally finding them outdoors. Some things like the larger feathers are runoff from other industries. Everything I source is sustainable or would have been discarded. I've literally asked people for skins after they've hunted that would have been thrown away. Can I have the skins, and then tan them and use them in other ways? So I'll use found, we spoke about the masks, but other kind of found vintage elements, shoes, all types of things like that. The marble grapes are all kind of found in antique vintage objects. So a lot of what I do is these kind of found or thrown off, cast off type of objects, hair and all that. And then I'll pair it with certain things that are new. For example, in this piece that we're looking at here, the upholstery, those are upholstery tacks. And so I'll repurpose those to kind of cover the whole face of the mask as well.
Mm-hmm. And this image doesn't really do this work justice. Beyond the kind of facets of the upholstery tacks, oof, it's a mouthful, that kind of catch the light. There's this resin that you've built up on the hair, and the hair kind of comes across the mask. So it really kind of has this shimmery, otherworldly, kind of futuristic quality to it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, I utilize resin for that purpose, and also sometimes it'll create almost like a dewdrop feel, especially on some of the plum fronds. When you use it on hair, it kind of gets matted and kind of gnarly, and it's sort of haunting in a way. So yes.
Yeah. So this one kind of holds my attention in the gallery. There are a number of works in there across media, but this one kind of draws my attention immediately for the reasons I talked about, but also, in some cases you really anthropomorphize these masks, and you talked about them as stand-ins for bodies, so that feels natural. And so in this case, there's this like this hair and this defined but obscured face. You kind of fill in the eyes or the other features. And other times, I think that this one, although this is a close-up, is a good example. They really become abstracted. And so, in this, the ones we've all been looking at for the last few minutes are all from this larger work, 7 Champions of Peculiar Engagement. Can you talk a little bit about how you're balancing that semi-human figure or totally abstracted figure? These languages really come together seamlessly in the work.
Thank you. Yeah, that's an important aspect of it too. I mean, and that goes across from the sculptures like this, like the masks, some of the creature figures, even some of the figures in the photographs. They're kind of all haint-like, these kind of ghost-like figures, or these witnesses, watchers, guardians. History is this is kind of this amorphous thing that I like to imagine, what if there was some figure who, was a witness for this long arc of history that was still kind of remaining in the present, which we don't have direct access to other than archival and kind of ethnographic type of material. But it's kind of a thought of experiment is what if we could imagine this long kind of witnessing subject, and what might they tell us about what's occurred on this land.
And the idea that that's a subject that changes over time, that it's not one person or one thing, it's this sort of omnipotent or omnipresent figure.
Yeah, it's kind of like a cast of them.
Well, so I'm curious, there are a couple of other masks in the show that are more standalone sculptures, but you make this grouping here. You use, a lot of your work, you use these very specific titles. Can you talk a little bit about this specific grouping and the title of 7 Champions of Peculiar Engagement?
Yeah, for this grouping, I was thinking a lot about texture, shape, color, pairing them in ways that were not completely symmetrical and yet somehow felt balanced at the same time. You'll see that there's sort of a balance to it, but it's not perfectly so. And that's just something that I like to do in the work in general. I always have these destabilizing factors. So you might imagine that the one with the hair should be immediately to the left of the pheasant one, or what have you. So it's got a little bit of, I think, added kind of shape and depth by kind of slightly mismatching the order, the color. I made this work during the first kind of leg of the pandemic season, and I was at home. I live in New York City, but I decided to spend those first few months down at home in northern Florida. And so I was pulling from a lot of the colors that I saw around me. I was home for the first time for a year and in a long time. Usually I do the snowbird thing and I kind of go down for the winter, but this was my first time really being there for the long summer season and what have you. So I was really affected by the changing colors in the landscape. And so a lot of people, when they think of Florida, they think of more like South Florida, which I did grow up partly in South and partly in North, and they could be 2 completely different states. And so I like to highlight some of the textures of northern Florida, which you indicated at the beginning of this is swamps and bayous and blackwater lakes and slow streams and it's got more of a marshy texture, the pine trees, browns and a heaviness to it. So and here's my speaking of this is a little bit of my region where I'm from. This I believe is the Dead Lakes over in Weewillhitchka, which is a small town not too far from us, but I shoot my film projects and photo projects all around these areas. And so this is where I was during the first part of the pandemic, being at home. And so you see the colors are very affected by all of that. This is on the one on the left, that's one of my favorite lakes in town in Leon County. And And then the right is the Wakulla River down in Wakulla County. So as you mentioned, it's this narrow strip of land. There's just two counties, Leon County on the north, which is bordering Georgia, and Wakulla is at the south, which hits the Gulf. And in and around there, there's Jefferson and Franklin County and Bay County, but that whole little cluster makes up the Big Bend area.
Okay.
And so, and it's just a very unique part of the country. So, all the work that I made in 2020 and 2021 really is heavily North Florida influenced, because that's where I was during this really crucial and wild time, and at the beginning of this pandemic chapter. So I think color wise and texture wise, a lot of that had to do with just that I made it when I was home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, when we started talking about your show for the Riley Cap Gallery, I think it was just at the beginning of COVID, and we were trying to figure out when were exhibitions going to happen and what was going to move where, and were we still going to be able to do shows. And so you were one of my first phone calls, because I thought, I don't want to miss an opportunity to work with Allison. But we decided pretty early on that we would treat this show as this kind of tightly edited survey that addresses the area you've been talking about. And I was really interested to see in an interview recently, you refer to this as a place where the landscape is in charge. So you've talked a little bit about this landscape, and the next image is sort of a bit funny and a bit terrifying, with you very close to a gator there on the right. Other than the kind of colors, like what else can you tell us about this landscape? I mean, I'm looking here at this moss dripping, the Spanish moss dripping from the trees, and obviously that has bearing on the masks. I'm thinking about the hair hanging down the masks. But what about it is, what about this landscape really has captured your imagination, and how it kind of plays into histories of the American South?
I mean, yeah, in so many ways, Karin. I mean, from industry, I have done projects exploring some of the industries of the region, the turpentine industry, citrus, even tourism. I've been thinking about in an upcoming project. So the way the industry collides onto the landscape, obviously the environment is a huge part of it that looms large in the face of natural disasters. The way that natural disasters and the response to, which I often call social disasters, really kind of come together and are a huge part of the story of the region. And thinking about our changing climate and how, as that continues, climate change continues, what will the relationship between this kind of social part of our world and the natural part of our world? I mean, what kind of twists and turns will that take us, especially as we think about environmental injustices that have happened on the land for hundreds of years? And so it's something that I think about both in kind of a tangible, concrete way, metaphorically, in kind of a surreal way, and also politically, socially, and bringing in all those issues as well. And just in terms of your question about the landscape being kind of in charge, I mean, it's just part of the country where it's just all kind of encompassing. The landscape it's very imposing, and if you live there, you just you roll with it. So.
You bend to the landscape, not the other way around.
Yeah, I mean, totally. I mean, the one on the left there, I just shot that. I mean, these are just quick little iPhone snaps, but the one on, and the first one was a Google image of the Dead Lakes, but the one on the left there, that's just like an iPhone. I took that on my iPhone. I was on the Wakulla River for that one as well in February. We're actually this time of year. This is, I mean, if y'all want to see manatees, go down to Wakulla. This is actually the time for. I think this was actually. I think I shot that actually February 2020, right before everything hit with the pandemic. You just. I mean, it's not. This is not a park or zoo. Any wildlife refuge. You literally just go out on the river, and this is what is there. Gators or manatees, and we have Florida panthers, and all these really amazing animals that we live with there in the region.
Yeah. I want to return to something you just said about the landscape looming large, because I think that's really beautifully encapsulated by these next two photographs, where the landscape is almost as much of a character in whatever narrative is playing out here as the three human subjects are. So I want to talk a little bit about these photographs. I find the juxtaposition of the girls in these kind of frilly frocks and these delicate, almost like flower wreaths on their heads, and these little ballet slippers. So the juxtaposition between that and then the seemingly intimidating forest is being quite striking. But what's interesting, I think, especially when you get face to face with these photographs, is that it doesn't appear as the girls are being threatened. Like there's this sort of like enveloping quality to the forest. So I'm wondering if you can talk about kind of how the humans and the landscape are interacting here and what you were thinking about with these photos.
That's a really good question. I mean, I think some of it is content of what I put into the image, and then some of it is some of the photographic devices and kind of breaking some of the rules of kind of contemporary photography in a way. I like for the landscape to be kind of just as much of a subject as the portrait sitter. So like the previous one, I have that, like the piece of that sable palm tree there in the foreground, and you see that the flash is really on the tree, which normally would be a no-no, but I want to bring in the landscape as subject, like not just as the background, but I like for the landscape to have kind of these moments literally in a spotlight. And so you have these three girls in the image, but the one in the center, it's almost, I mean, your eye goes almost as much to the young girl in the center as it does to that tree off to the side, and all of that is purposeful for me. And so, and also even just kind of tilting the camera slightly down, you know, into the forest floor rather than focusing just at the top. It does kind of bring in an enveloping quality that I wanted to have. And so yeah, and the subjects there, the three girls, they are sort of these also these kind of ghost-like, almost maybe fairy-ish like figures, and they function the same, similar to how some of the other adult kind of paint characters operate in the work. And so you know, the content like the ballet slippers and the wreaths, you know, and all of that, like you said, it does kind of play into this kind of almost like a sprite or kind of woodland kind of spirit, and similarly to all the other types of objects and figures, there are these sort of witnesses or these sort of kind of characters that animate, you know, further animate the land and further kind of allow us to imagine the landscape itself as very alive, but in a way that is subjective, not just alive in the way that we think of trees as being alive, or we think of a forest setting as being alive, but really kind of pulsing with life, you know, and just really having this kind of almost like a character witness subject, and really destabilizing the idea of us as the viewer as the subject when it relates to the landscape, allowing the landscape to stand in as a subject through human bodies, and also through some of the devices that are normally reserved for the portrait sitter being used on the landscape itself.
Yeah, and I one of the things I really appreciate about these photographs and the two we're going to look at the end, and I want to kind of save this conversation for the end of our talk, but this the great power that resides in these subjects vis-a-vis their kind of you know, all-encompassing surroundings. And I'm glad you said the bit about, you know, shining the flash on that tree in the foreground, and how the girl still kind of holds the position of power in the image. And in looking at it again, you know, she's as much a sentinel in this forest, standing tall and strong, as this tree is.
Right.
And so that interplay is really quite nice. And it does breathe. Like, I mean, the exhibition feels like it's breathing. I said to you the other day, like I walked in and I felt like it was sort of you know, pulsing in a way. So we've touched on this idea of power. I want to lead in now to this other kind of formal component that's in the show, these yard signs. And these are not the ones that are in the show, but I want to include these as kind of background images.
Yeah.
So the yard sign series is ongoing. It's sort of a loose series, references this tradition that's perpetuated across the South. I'm hoping you can give us a little more backstory on the yard show or yard art in the American South. And I'm particularly interested in this idea that these are objects that are assigned power by their makers in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, yard art is something that you see all around the South when you drive through, and there's some certain yard artists that have become really well known for their yards of all different types, whether that's Joe Minter, whether that's Pearl Fryer. There's so many that I, am inspired by and I'm always looking towards. And so for me, I'm kind of experimenting with using the yard sign as a form in and of itself, and kind of as not just a material or reference, but really using it as a formal element, as not only an embellished sculpture, but as a set of languages, a set of kind of lineages of these yard artists. So this is kind of my way of paying tribute to them. And then this is the one, the Red Hills yard sign from the show. And this is one that I kind of have taken that format, and again, using it as a formal element, then seeing how far I can push that and continue to abstract it. And so this is one where I found palm fronds and coated, with some are spray paint and different types of paint, resin, and then we have it on a steel back armature. And so, and this was, I believe this is the first one that I've wall mounted.
Okay.
And so this and another one, first couple. And so I wanted to kind of push that language of the yard art, which is my previous ones were leaning onto the wall and have them flush the wall like a painting would, to really kind of, again, play around with thinking about it as a form. So kind of leaning into the language of painting a little bit with this kind of sculptural vernacular art form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like this sort of transcends boundaries of medium. It certainly has sculptural presence because there's relief, it comes away from the wall. And actually this is kind of the first work you encounter in entering the exhibition, and you see it at its profile. And then you come around, you realize kind of what great heft it has, and the steel really sort of like anchors it in space. Steel is also weighs quite a lot, and so but you get that impression of heft when you're looking at it, despite the kind of lightness and almost frivolity of the palm fronds, which kind of hang down and could dust the floor. There's a really nice balance of materials here.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I want to end this evening's conversation with two incredibly powerful photographs that I think really kind of tie together a lot of the elements that we find in this exhibition. And I'm going to talk a little bit about your interest in mythologies and these kind of great epic narratives. I'm hoping you can talk a bit about how the logic behind things like mythologies, the logic behind those kinds of stories present themselves in this photograph, and then the next one, which we'll take a look at here in a moment.
Yeah, that's another a great question. I'm so drawn into long storylines, long epic tales and myths, whether it's popular culture or kind of ancient, or classics, African mythologies, Greek, Roman mythologies, folklore from my home region, especially Tennessee. A lot of Tennessee folklore makes its way into the storylines within my photographs, kind of the narratives. I'm always kind of dropping the viewer sort of in the middle of a moment. So it looks like maybe something has happened, it's about to happen. We're kind of in between something occurring. It's another kind of destabilizing feature of the work. And yet a lot of times compositionally, it is very structured and very solid, but there's an element to the movement, or an element to something that's taking place that feels like we're kind of in the middle, or we're witnessing some moment. And so, chapter by chapter, these kind of apparition figures, they kind of appear. Some of them have habits and kind of characteristics and different things about their nature that shift and change slowly from series to series. That it's all friends and family that are in the work. This is a good family friend who's kind of like an aunt figure. Oh, and then on this one, so that's in the foreground, it's my godmother there. In the middle is, yeah, good family friend, kind of like an aunt, and my mom is over on the far right. And my mom is in a lot of my work. And the three girls in the previous that we were talking about, those are good friends, a good friend's daughters. And they're also in some upcoming film projects, and so it's all friends and family that are kind of willing to take this kind of trippy ride with me throughout all these different kind of scenes and character presentations.
Can you say a bit about your decision to work with people who are like centrally important in your kind of orbit of your life, as opposed to actors or other kinds of people? You know, why was that an important decision for your practice?
I couldn't have imagined doing it another way. I mean, I have worked with actors before, but they were friend adjacent, like a friend of a friend, you know, or something like that. Or a project I'm working on right now is probably the first time that I've actually done a casting call. But I also use friends and family as well. So it's just something that I really enjoy doing. I think it's important. You know, if I'm making work about where I'm from, it's just important to me personally to have my family in it, my friends in it, people who have their own experiences that they could speak to firsthand. To me, it's just a lot of fun to bring them in that way, and they contribute their own ideas. My mom has made up her own character called Bracencia, who appears in some of the earlier photographs. So she's kind of named herself this character, and so it's really interesting working with my friends and family. But you know, I've done, yeah, I'm starting to do a little bit of casting, but I always will have something in or even if it's voiceover on a film, you know, have my grandmother or somebody will do a voice, or my brother has helped me mix some of the sound and music on certain things. So I like bringing them in to all the projects I can.
I appreciate that. So I want to kind of end talking about this dichotomy you and I discussed the other day, which I found really compelling, that exists in a lot of your work, and I would include the fencing masks in this as well. This sort of tension between pleasure or leisure and then like battle or fortitude. So I'm hoping you can say a bit about how that plays out in this image, in the kind of characters that these women are embodying. They have these diaphanous gowns, but they're you know, they project quite a powerful image.
Yeah.
You know, why, can you talk about also, so how that plays out here, but why is striking that balance kind of significant to your broader project?
Yeah, that plays out in a few ways. I mean, the grapes that my godmother's character there is holding, it's kind of this symbol of both war and also pleasure and leisure. Like you said, the way they're dressed similarly, and posture, stance. And that's something that I do a lot in the work. I think coming from Florida, which is again a state that most people associate with tourism, you know, vacation, pleasure, leisure, drink with, you know, in your hand with an umbrella in it, you know, and but also, you know, the industry, turpentining, which was basically a de facto kind of slave system that lasted well into you know, from the antebellum period all throughout to the modern era. And so, you know, Florida has such a rich, deep, haunting, terrific, beautiful, this really complex history that is more than just kind of what we think of when we think Florida. And so doing that kind of destabilizing factor, having these moments that kind of lean into this pleasurable experience or beauty, and then into something that's destabilizing or haunting. You see that with the video that I have on view at the show as well. The kind of, you know, it's this kind of blue, kind of dreamy image of these clouds and water, but then you have these bugs floating, you know, on the surface, skimming the surface of the water too. And that's really kind of horrifying, you know, the more you look at it, and you kind of keep going in your mind back and forth between being pleased by the colors and also disturbed by the kind of vermin in the water. And so I do a lot of those kind of twists and turns in the work, and kind of not letting the viewer get too comfortable in the same way that I don't want people to get too comfortable with this idea of Florida, or these ideas and myths and mythologies of the landscape, because there's always another kind of side to the coin.
Mhm. Okay, so that is essentially the end of the conversation. As I mentioned, we had a little audio problem just after that, but essentially after that, I just said, that's so wonderful and interesting, and thank you so much, Allison. So I do want to thank Allison for taking the time to record with us this week, and wish her well. So now I want to say a bit more about a project Allison mentioned earlier in the talk when she was talking about casting people for her new film. So this is her first feature-length film, and it's being commissioned by the Mississippi Museum of Art in Jackson and the Baltimore Museum of Art for this incredible exhibition that they are co-organizing called A Movement in Every Direction, Legacies of the Great Migration. And the show, which opens in early April 9th in Jackson, and then in October in Baltimore, features 12 artists who are Black who've made new work reflecting on their families' connections to the American South. And of course, the backdrop for this show is the Great Migration, this unprecedented movement of roughly 6 million Black Americans from the South to cities across the country between 1950 and 1970. So if you happen to find yourself in Jackson or Baltimore this year, I encourage you to take a chance to see that show and all the wonderful commissions there. So now let's see, I don't see any questions in the Q&A. I will go to the chat. And there are no questions in the chat either. Well, I'll give you a moment if you want to drop any questions in the Q&A. While you're thinking about it, I want to talk about another exciting thing Joslyn has coming up. We are thrilled to be restarting our travel program, which starts this year. And if you're interested in traveling with me and spending some time looking at contemporary art, we are planning to be in Venice in October 10th through the 15th for the Venice Biennale, which has been pushed off by a year because of COVID. So we're hoping to see it this year. The American Pavilion will feature the incredible sculptor Simone Lee, who will be the first Black woman to be in the US Pavilion. So really an exciting opportunity for her. And then just this week, the curator of the main exhibition released her plans. There are 213 artists in the exhibition, most of whom are women, and 180 of whom have never been in the Venice Biennale before. So this is really an incredibly exciting and important exhibition. And Venice is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to see great stuff and eat good food and talk about a lot of art. So you can find more information about that trip and all of Joslyn's upcoming programs, some of which are also domestic, on our website. I think there's a link right on the main page. Okay, no questions. Well, thank you all again for joining this evening. Thank you to Allison and for your ongoing support of the institution. This exhibition opens tomorrow and you will have until May 1st to see it. So please come down to Joslyn and have a great night. Thank you all.